You know, when most of us picture the start of the American Revolution, there's a very specific, almost like a cinematic painting that pops into our heads.
Oh, yeah.
Like we've all seen it in the textbooks.
Yeah.
It's the solitary ragtag farmer.
Right.
He's out in his field, maybe chewing on a piece of straw, wiping sweat from his brow.
Yeah, the classic image.
And suddenly, a church bell rings in the distance. He drops his plow, sprints into his cabin, grabs this dusty hunting musket off the mantle, and just sort of improvises his way into fighting the greatest military superpower on Earth.
Right, the myth of the spontaneous, untrained volunteer.
Yeah.
It is a deeply romantic image, and it is completely baked into American national consciousness.
Totally.
It feeds this idea that sheer willpower and pioneer spirit just spontaneously defeated the British Empire.
Right. But today, we are doing a deep dive into a massive stack of historical research, legal documents, and town records covering the actual colonial militia system. And when you look at the real historical record, that romantic painting of the lone farmer, it completely dissolves.
It really does.
We're looking at a colonial landscape that wasn't improvised at all. Like, it was one of the most highly regulated, legally mandated, and deeply entrenched civic systems in human history.
It was the absolute definition of a well-oiled machine, operating under extreme statutory pressure.
Yeah.
The colonists didn't just invent a new military on the fly in 1775. They activated a 150-year-old civic culture.
Wow.
And our mission in this deep dive is to completely dismantle that ragtag volunteer myth. We're going to explore the historical, the legal, and the practical foundations of the 1700s colonial militia system.
Right.
We'll look at the brutal realities of the frontier, and we'll use the rural town of Chesterfield, Massachusetts, and a man named Captain Joseph Burnell as our micro study to see how this incredibly complex system actually worked on the ground.
The British government didn't prohibit weapons for the colonists. They legally mandated them.
Yeah, to really understand what happened at Lexington and Concord, we actually have to travel back about 600 years before the Revolution to medieval England.
Oh, okay.
We need to look at the legal DNA of the militia. Bearing arms wasn't a right that the crown generously granted to its subjects. It was a tax.
Right.
It was a duty that the subjects owed to the crown.
So the king wasn't giving you a gift. He was extracting a contribution so he didn't have to pay for a massive standing army.
Exactly. It begins in the year 1181 with something called the Assize of Arms, issued by King Henry II.
Okay.
This was a royal command imposing the maintenance of weapons based strictly on your wealth.
Wait, on your wealth?
Yeah, it was a graduated scale.
Right.
So if you were a wealthy knight, you were required by law to keep a coat of mail, a helmet, a shield, and a lance.
That makes sense.
But even the poorest free layman, the guy barely scraping by, he was required by the king to own and maintain an axe and a bow with arrows.
And what about the guys in the middle? Like the average medieval middle class?
Well, they had to have an iron cap and a gambeson.
A gambeson. What exactly is a gambeson?
Yeah, it was essentially a thick, padded tunic.
Oh.
Imagine layers upon layers of heavy linen stuffed tightly with horsehair, scrap cloth, or wool, and then quilted together.
Sounds incredibly heavy.
It was heavy and it was very hot, but it was surprisingly effective at stopping glancing blows or, absorbing the impact of an arrow.
Oh, wow.
It functioned as basically medieval Kevlar for people who couldn't afford metal armor.
That's fascinating.
So depending on your exact tax bracket, the king dictated the specific weapons loadout you had to keep ready in your home.
Okay, so then a century later, in 1285, King Edward I expands this with the Statute of Windsor.
Right.
And this is where the source says it really connects to the broader picture of civic life, because he ties this military readiness to local policing.
Yes.
The document mentions something called the hue and cry. Is that literally just yelling for help?
It was an actual formal legal mechanism.
Yeah.
Yeah. In a society without professional police forces, if a crime was committed, say, someone steals your neighbor's livestock or a traveler is assaulted, you were legally obligated to raise the hue and cry, which meant physically yelling and sounding an alarm.
Oh, I see.
And every able-bodied man who heard it was legally required to drop what they were doing, grab their mandated weapons, and chase down the suspect.
So every man between 15 and 60 had to keep arms, and local constables would inspect them twice a year to make sure they weren't, rusting away in a corner somewhere.
Exactly.
If I try to map this medieval mandate onto today's world, it's not like having a personal hobby where you collect antique swords and polish them on the weekends.
No, not at all.
It's more like mandatory car insurance or jury duty. It's a legal requirement you must maintain at your own personal expense for the benefit of the state.
That's a great analogy.
And if you don't have it, you face steep penalties.
Right, because you are maintaining this equipment because the state demands it for civic order. And this concept, it evolves further in 1572, during the Elizabethan era, with the instructions for general muster.
Okay.
This introduced the idea of trained bands.
Trained bands.
Yeah, so instead of just a massive, uncoordinated mob of armed men turning out for the hue and cry, local leaders selected a subset of able-bodied men for active, regular drill under professional instructors.
Got it.
This distinction between a highly trained, active group and the general population who just had to keep weapons at home, this directly inspired how Massachusetts eventually structured its own system.
So this rigid, highly organized system works in medieval and Elizabethan England because everyone is relatively stationary, right?
Right.
Society is settled. But what happens when you take that exact law and drop it into a completely untamed wilderness 3,000 miles away across the Atlantic?
Well, it accelerates,
Yeah.
entirely out of sheer necessity. Let's look at the Massachusetts Bay Colony. On December 13, 1636, the General Court organized 3 regiments, north, south, and east.
Okay.
This wasn't some theoretical exercise imported from London. It was driven by escalating violent tensions with the Pequot Nation. In early Massachusetts, the entire concept of what constituted a town was legally defined by this defense mandate.
Wait, really?
Yeah, a community could only be formally incorporated and recognized as a town if it could muster 64 armed men, pay a muster master, and construct a secure place to store gunpowder and supplies.
Wow. So if you didn't have 64 guys with guns, you weren't a town.
Nope.
You were just a highly vulnerable collection of cabins.
Exactly. You just weren't a town.
Mutual defense literally built the civic structure of New England. But not absolutely everyone was required to serve on the training field, right?
Right.
The law had specific carve-outs.
It did. The statutory exemptions were very specific. So ministers of religion, Harvard faculty, surgeons, millers, and explicitly stated in the law, Indians and Negroes were exempt from the mandatory training obligation.
Which brings us to one of those politically charged arguments from our source material that we flagged at the beginning.
Right. The author of the research uses this specific colonial law to push back against modern accusations arising from critical race theory.
Okay.
The author's argument is that colonial law did not deny free black or indigenous men the fundamental right to self-defense. It merely relieved them of the statutory obligation to serve in the highly regulated militia system.
I see.
The text points out that free black and Native American men did, in fact, serve alongside colonial militias throughout this period, but they simply weren't subjected to the mandatory legal requirement and the fines that came with it.
Right. And again, we are just presenting the author's viewpoint and framing there.
Yes, absolutely.
But looking internally at how these early militias functioned, it was actually highly democratic for the 17th century. Like up until 1668, these militiamen elected their own officers.
Yeah, it mirrored exactly how Puritan congregations operated. They elected their ministers based on community consensus and spiritual leadership. And they applied that exact same democratic principle to the training field.
Wait, so if you are electing your minister in the church and you're electing your selectman, which is essentially your mayor or town council at the town meeting, and you are electing your military captain out on the training field, aren't they really just 3 different hats worn by the exact same group of guys?
Yes, that is the defining feature of colonial Massachusetts. The church, the town meeting, and the militia were not distinct spheres of life.
Wow.
They were just 3 different expressions of the exact same covenantal community. There was absolutely no separation between these civilian and military spheres.
Right.
Your military obligation was your civic obligation.
So this whole system, these trained bands, this English blueprint of massed formations and regular drill, it all sounds very impressive on paper.
It does.
Until they run into the brutal reality of the New World.
Exactly. The crucible that changed everything, that forced this English system to adapt or die, was King Philip's War, running from 1675 to 1676.
What exactly was the buildup to this? The research notes it was one of the bloodiest conflicts per capita in American history.
It really was. The underlying causes were decades in the making.
Okay.
The English colonists were rapidly expanding their settlements. Their livestock were roaming free and destroying native planting grounds, which obviously threatened the food supply of the Algonquian nations.
Right.
And that's a massive linguistic and cultural group of indigenous peoples in the region, which includes the Wampanoag.
Got it.
On top of that, colonial courts were aggressively trying to subordinate native peoples to English law.
And the immediate spark, according to the research, involved a man named John Sassamon.
Yes.
He was a Christianized native interpreter, and when he turned up murdered, Plymouth Colony tried and executed 3 Wampanoag men for the crime.
Right. That execution ignited long-simmering grievances held by the Wampanoag sachem or leader, Metacom, whom the English called King Philip.
Oh.
The resulting war was apocalyptic for the region. It was marked by terrifying woodland ambushes, the complete burning of over a dozen English settlements, and just horrific colonial retaliation, such as the Great Swamp Massacre.
Yeah, what happened at the Great Swamp Massacre?
So in the freezing winter of 1675, a combined colonial militia force tracked the Narragansett people, who had remained largely neutral, but were accused of harboring Wampanoag fighters.
Okay.
They tracked them to a fortified winter camp in a frozen swamp in Rhode Island.
Oh, no.
The colonists attacked, they breached the palisades and burned the village to the ground, killing hundreds of men, women, and children.
That's awful.
It was a point of no return that ultimately shattered indigenous political power in southern New England.
The research notes this conflict caused a massive psychological and tactical shift for the colonists. Like, psychologically, it deeply traumatized the entire region.
Very much so.
The author states it replaced any lingering romantic myths of the, quote, noble savage with the pure generational terror of the frontier. Every rustle of leaves could mean an ambush. But tactically, here's where it gets really interesting. This is where the English military playbook just goes out the window.
Entirely. The colonists quickly realized that the Elizabethan style of warfare was basically a death sentence in New England.
Yeah.
Traditional European tactics involved slow, highly disciplined volley fire.
Right.
You stand shoulder to shoulder in massed formations in an open field, and you fire all at once.
Which makes sense in Europe.
Exactly. But that is completely useless against the mobile, ambush-oriented tactics of the Algonquian fighters, who utilized the dense forests, rocky terrain, and natural camouflage to just devastating effect.
So it's like trying to drive a slow-moving, heavily armored vehicle through a dense, unmapped forest.
Right, while your enemy is zipping around you on off-road dirt bikes.
Exactly. The armored vehicle is technically powerful on a paved road, but in the woods, it's going to get destroyed because it cannot adapt. The colonists had to learn how to ride the dirt bikes if they wanted to survive.
Yeah, and that adaptation led Massachusetts to invent specialized expeditionary light infantry forces. They stopped worrying about marching in perfect lines. They prioritized individual marksmanship, extreme mobility, and rapid response. This is the direct origin of the Minutemen. They learned to fight from behind cover and concealment, just as Metacom's warriors had fought them.
But if the frontier is this terrifying, and the threat of a raid is always looming, how does the colonial law ensure that these everyday farmers are actually ready to fight at a moment's notice? Like, what did a day in the life of a typical militiaman look like?
It was incredibly demanding and heavily regulated. Provincial law eventually mandated 6 training days a year, but they had to be carefully scheduled around the rigid agricultural calendar. You'd have 2 in April before the heavy spring work, 1 in May, 1 in June, and 2 in October after the harvest.
Right, because you couldn't pull men away during peak planting or harvest, or the town would literally starve over the winter.
Exactly. And when you showed up on a Tuesday in April, you couldn't just bring a pitchfork. The gear mandate is astonishingly specific. You were legally required to bring a 69 to 75 caliber flintlock musket or a 50 to 60 caliber bastard musket.
A bastard musket. What makes it a bastard musket?
It essentially refers to a non-standard caliber.
Okay.
A standard military musket fired a massive lead ball around .75 caliber. A bastard musket fired a slightly smaller ball. It was cheaper to acquire, lighter to carry, and still incredibly lethal. But it was a total nightmare for logistics because you couldn't easily standardize the ammunition supply for the whole unit.
Right, you can't just hand out identical bullets to everyone.
Exactly.
And along with the musket, you needed 20 bullets, exactly 1 pound of gunpowder, exactly 12 flints for the firing mechanism, a cutting sword, and a cartridge box.
Yep.
I imagine this wasn't just a friendly suggestion from the captain.
Oh, not at all. If you showed up for inspection and your musket was rusted, or you only had 11 flints instead of 12, you were fined on the spot by the company clerk.
Wow.
The system had 0 tolerance for unreadiness.
But what if you were a poor farmer who barely had enough money for seed, let alone a hefty fine for a missing flint?
Well, this is where the strictness of the system becomes very apparent. If you couldn't pay the fine, you face severe corporal punishment.
Yeah, the punishments detailed in the source material are horrifying. Like, if you couldn't pay, they might tie you, quote, neck and heels.
Hmm.
The research describes this as a painful stress position, where they literally fold your body up, pulling your neck down and tying it to your ankles until your muscles spasm and you can barely breathe.
It's brutal.
Or, even worse, they could force you to ride the wooden horse.
Yes. For riding the wooden horse, they would take a sharp, peaked wooden rail, hoist it up on legs, and force the man to straddle it.
Mm.
Then, to maximize the pain, they would tie heavy muskets to his feet to pull him down onto the sharp edge for an hour or more.
This brings up a massive question for me. In a small town where everyone knows everyone, where you go to church together, your kids play together, how on earth does a community enforce such humiliating, torturous punishments on their own neighbors without completely tearing the town apart?
It is the central question of social cohesion in early America.
Yeah.
How do you tie your neighbor to a wooden horse at 9 a.m. and then help him raise a barn the following week?
Exactly.
The answer lies in the mandatory midday tavern break.
Ah.
After the morning drill, the grueling inspections, and the punishments, the officers and the enlisted men retreated to the local tavern or the town green to eat and drink together.
So the local government provides a massive spread of rum, hard cider, bread, and roasted meat.
Yes, and this communal meal blurred the harsh military drill with basically a raucous community festival.
Okay.
The social hierarchy on the field was strict. The captain was absolute law. But that hierarchy was intentionally softened by this shared physical experience. The men drank together, they gossiped, and they discussed town politics.
It makes sense. And to understand how a town actually functioned under this immense pressure, we need to shift from the macro-level law to a micro-level example.
Right.
Like, who were the men enforcing these rules, collecting these fines, and buying the rum? The research takes us to Chesterfield, Massachusetts.
Yes, Chesterfield was incorporated in 1762. It is a harsh, high-elevation farming town. The soil is rocky, the winters are brutal, and carving out a living took immense resilience.
Yeah.
The author uses a man named Captain Joseph Burnell, born in 1725, as the ultimate archetype of the colonial civic military leader.
Looking at Burnell's resume is exhausting. Like, he wasn't just a guy who put on a uniform a few days a year. He was one of the original selectmen who ran the town government.
Right.
He was a founding member of the local congregational church. He served on the school committee to hire teachers. He was on the committee of safety. He was the militia captain. And crucially, he was a miller.
Yes.
He built a dam and a grist mill at Damon Pond. Why is the grist mill so important to his authority?
Well, we have to understand the mechanics of 18th century life. A grist mill is a water-powered facility that uses massive, heavy stone wheels to grind raw grain into usable flour.
Okay.
Every single farmer in Chesterfield grew grain, which meant every single farmer eventually had to bring their harvest to Joseph Burnell's mill.
Oh, I see.
Grinding grain is a slow process. You don't just drop it off, you wait. Farmers would sit around the mill for hours, sometimes all day, waiting for their flour.
So Burnell's mill becomes the 18th century water cooler. It's the information hub.
Yeah.
If you want to know who is buying land, who is sick, or what news just arrived from Boston, you go talk to the miller.
Right. The miller knew everyone's economic status, their family dynamics, and their political leanings.
Yeah.
The research argues that the militia system relied entirely on what we could call ambient community trust.
Ambient trust.
Yeah, Burnell's authority as a military captain wasn't just derived from a piece of paper signed by a distant governor in Boston. He was earned daily through his civic service.
As a selectman, Burnell literally handled the poor relief and the tax logistics for the exact same men he commanded on the training field.
Right.
It wasn't some sterile, faceless government bureaucracy managing these men. If Burnell ordered you to march, you marched, because he was the guy who ground your wheat, funded your kids' school, and sat in the pew next to you on Sunday.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The author describes this as a constitutional culture. Burnell translated his immense community trust directly into military action. The men trusted his judgment because they trusted his character.
So you have this incredibly tight-knit, highly armed, legally mandated, deeply trusted community structure all across New England.
Yes.
What happens when the British Parliament, the very body that originated these weapons mandates centuries ago, tries to disarm it?
Well, we entered the decade of intense, accelerating political polarization from 1765 to 1775.
Okay.
The British government passes a series of taxes, like the Townshend Acts of 1767, which imposes new duties on glass, lead, paint, paper, and tea. And to enforce these taxes, they bring customs officers and thousands of regular British troops into Boston.
And the colonists view these British regulars not as protectors, but as paid mercenaries with no civic stake in the community. They are the exact antithesis of the citizen militia model built by men like Joseph Burnell.
Exactly. The tension boils over with the Boston Massacre in 1770, but the real structural breaking point is the powder alarm in September 1774.
What happened there?
General Thomas Gage, the royal governor of Massachusetts, realizes the countryside is a powder keg. So he sends 200 British regulars on a secret early morning mission to seize 250 half barrels of provincial gunpowder stored in Somerville, which is just outside Boston.
And the colonial response is overwhelming. Like, word of the seizure leaks out. Rumors spread like wildfire, some falsely claiming the British had fired on civilians.
Right.
And within 24 hours, an estimated 20,000 militiamen from across New England mobilize and begin marching toward Boston.
The sheer speed and scale of the mobilization terrified General Gage. He realized the militia's readiness wasn't just paper compliance. It was a highly functional, highly lethal reality.
And here is where the source brings in another highly specific modern comparison regarding Gage's next moves.
Right. Following the powder alarm, General Gage proposes essentially disbanding the local armed forces entirely and replacing them with British regular troops who would be housed at the colonists' expense.
Okay.
The author of our research compares this proposal directly to modern defund the police movement.
I see.
The text argues that colonists viewed Gage's actions as a literal attempt to defund and abolish their local trusted law enforcement, leaving them utterly defenseless against both frontier threats and British overreach.
Right.
And again, we're impartially reporting the source's analogy here to convey how the author frames the colonial mindset. They viewed Gage's plan as, quote, social suicide.
Looking at the legal history we just covered, wasn't Gage essentially violating centuries of his own English law? Like, the Crown mandated that these men arm themselves for civic defense. Now Gage is trying to disarm the very system his predecessors built.
In the eyes of the colonists, that is exactly what he was doing.
Yeah.
Gage was mirroring the actions of King Charles I during the English Civil War, basically using the control and disarmament of the local militia as a blunt tool of political domination.
Wow.
Gage's overreach during the powder alarm forces the colonists' hand. In October 1774, they form a parallel government, the Massachusetts Provincial Congress, and an executive committee of safety.
They effectively transfer their deference from the royal governor to this new, homegrown provincial body.
Yes.
And Gage realizes that if he's going to seize any more colonial military stores, he cannot afford another massive public alarm. He needs absolute airtight secrecy.
Which leads directly to the fateful night of April 18, 1775.
Right.
Gage organizes a force of about 700 elite regulars, light infantry, and grenadiers. Under the cover of darkness, he sends them out of Boston with two objectives: seize the hidden military stores in the town of Concord and arrest the prominent Patriot leaders Samuel Adams and John Hancock, who were staying in Lexington.
But in a close-quartered, paranoid city like Boston, keeping a 700-man amphibious deployment secret was mathematically impossible.
Absolutely impossible.
And enter the famous alarm system. We all know the name Paul Revere from the poem, but the research makes it abundantly clear he wasn't just a lone, frantic guy winging it through the countryside.
Not at all. Revere was part of a redundant, highly organized, pre-planned network.
Right.
He rode alongside William Dawes and later Dr. Samuel Prescott. Revere actually gets captured by a British patrol. Dawes is thrown from his horse and has to turn back. It's Dr. Prescott who actually makes it all the way to Concord to raise the final alarm.
The research points out a fascinating detail here. This alarm system relied on those 13th century hue and cry principles, but layered onto 18th century postal routes.
Yes, these post riders knew every rock in the road. They knew exactly which households held the local leadership.
Going back to our modern analogies, Revere wasn't a lone wolf improvising a rescue mission. He was a systems engineer activating a massive, pre-tested emergency protocol.
Exactly.
He didn't just ride through the dark, yelling generally out of windows. He rode to specific nodes in the network. He rode to men exactly like Captain Joseph Burnell. And it was those local men who then triggered the meeting house bells and fired the alarm guns.
And this network's ruthless efficiency led to the confrontation on Lexington Green at 0500 hours on the morning of April 19th.
Right.
The sun is barely coming up. There's a heavy ground fog.
Yeah.
Captain John Parker, who was actually suffering from tuberculosis at the time, had assembled 77 local militiamen on the green. They were outnumbered 10-1 by the vanguard of the British light infantry.
The British commander ordered the colonists to lay down their arms and disperse. Parker knew he was outgunned, and he ordered his men to back away. But as they were withdrawing in the fog, a shot rang out. Nobody knows who fired it.
In response, the British regulars fired a devastating, undisciplined volley directly into the retreating militiamen.
Wow.
They surged forward with their bayonets, leaving 8 militiamen dead and 10 wounded on the grass. The British officers finally regained control of their men and continued their march toward Concord to find the weapons.
But by 0930 hours, when the British arrived at the North Bridge in Concord, the situation had drastically changed.
Yeah.
The Colonial network had worked. Minutemen from half a dozen surrounding towns had amassed on the high ground. When the British fired first at the bridge, killing Captain Isaac Davis of Acton, the Colonials didn't scatter.
No, they stepped forward and returned fire in a highly disciplined volley, killing 2 British regulars and wounding several officers. The British lines broke, and the long, bloody retreat back to Boston began.
The text emphasizes that virtually no modern historian argues this point. The British initiated hostilities at both Lexington and Concord. But the real victory for the colonists on April 19 wasn't just pushing the British down a road. It was the astonishing success of the communication network. The source notes that the mechanics of the alarm radar system intentionally prioritized speed over accuracy.
Yes, that is a critical insight into how they managed information. A post rider galloping through the night didn't stop in a town, dismount, and wait for a town hall meeting to gather and verify his news.
No.
He just yelled, "The regulars are out," to the local captain or selectman, and immediately rode on to the next town.
So it was entirely up to that local leader, a guy like Burnell, to decide whether to ring the meeting house bell and send his neighbors into a potential war zone.
Exactly. And the speed of this transmission is staggering for an era of dirt roads and horses.
Yeah.
The Lexington Alarm Dispatch reached New Haven, Connecticut by April 20. It reached New York City by April 23 and is being read in Baltimore, Maryland by April 26.
That's incredible.
In just 13 days, 14,000 armed men mobilized locally across New England, and the entire continent was politically activated.
If we pull this all together, looking at the Assize of Arms, King Philip's War, and the Wooden Horse, what is the ultimate takeaway here?
The ultimate takeaway is that the colonists didn't invent a new military on the morning of April 19, 1775. They activated a 150-year-old civic culture to protect the independence and self-governance they effectively already possessed.
Right.
Men like Joseph Burnell were the vital linchpins. The system didn't work because of a piece of parchment. It worked because it was the community in arms.
Yeah.
It was the same men, the same relationships, and the same network of daily trust, simply organized for a military purpose.
They trusted Burnell at his gristmill to filter the noise and validate the crisis for his town.
Precisely.
And that leaves me with a final thought for us to mull over today. Think about our modern information networks. We have absolutely perfected the speed part of that 1775 alarm system.
Oh, without a doubt.
A tweet, a push notification, or a news alert can circle the globe in seconds. But because we've lost that hyper-local, face-to-face community trust, because we don't all have a Captain Burnell at the local mill to filter and validate the news for us, does our modern obsession with speed over accuracy leave us paralyzed by false alarms rather than unified by real ones?
That is a profound question to leave on. The technology changes, but the need for trusted gatekeepers remains exactly the same. We are basically going to attempt to reverse engineer a piece of lost history today.
I love that.
Yeah, it's a super cool deep dive. And this document methodically resurrects the 1775 colors of the Chesterfield, Massachusetts Militia Company. This isn't a surviving artifact we're looking at. We are analyzing a historically reasoned reconstruction.
And that phrase, historically reasoned reconstruction, I mean, that's the key to this entire discussion.
Right.
The document provides this masterclass in how historians fill those blank spaces. We're looking at Massachusetts in 1775, which, a time and place I think this audience knows pretty well.
Yeah, the air is just thick with the impending revolution.
Exactly. But instead of focusing on the broad strokes of the war, this research zeroes in on the intense, hyper-local expressions of identity that you'd find in militia flags.
Although I know there might be a bit of skepticism right out of the gate here.
Oh, sure.
Some listeners are probably thinking, if this specific flag might never have existed, are we just analyzing historical fan fiction here?
Right.
Like, why dedicate an entire deep dive to an image someone just reasoned into existence?
But that's exactly why this is so compelling. It's not fiction at all. It's forensic synthesis.
Yeah.
When the specific artifact, so in this case the Chesterfield flag, is lost, you don't just guess. You look at the historical stratum.
Okay, let's unpack this because it's basically like a forensic historian reconstructing a dinosaur.
I like that analogy, yeah.
You might not have the Chesterfield bone, but you have the Bedford bone.
Exactly.
So you know what the skeleton should look like.
Right. You examine the flags that did survive from that exact same geographic and temporal layer, like the Bedford flag or the Forster flag.
Right, the contemporary.
Yeah. You identify the aesthetic DNA of those surviving pieces, and you use those dominant traits to build a highly probable model of the missing piece.
It's the historical equivalent of evolutionary biology.
Exactly.
You understand the skeletal structure of a Massachusetts militia flag in 1775. They relied on painted silk fields, heraldic imagery, and highly specific political mottos.
So let's use the Bedford flag as our baseline here, because the contrast between it and the Reconstruction is incredibly revealing.
Okay.
So the Bedford color, which was carried by Nathaniel Page's Minutemen, is arguably the most famous surviving flag of this specific era.
And visually, it is an aggressive statement.
Super aggressive.
It features this bright crimson silk field, and it's dominated by a silver armored arm emerging from a cloud grasping a sword.
Yeah, and it features the Latin motto, Vincit Morir.
Conquer or die.
Right. It's this heavy, classical piece of intimidation.
It's intense.
But when we look at the research detailing the Chesterfield reconstruction, the imagery is adapted into something that tells a noticeably different ideological story.
And the most immediate shift to me is linguistic. The Chesterfield design abandons the Latin entirely. Like, instead of a classical phrase, the top scroll just simply reads, "In defense of freedom," and the bottom scroll identifies the Chesterfield Company.
Right.
But why bother making that translation? I mean, in an era where classical education was highly revered, everyone understood what a Latin motto on a military banner signified.
Sure.
So why does plain English suddenly become the necessary choice for a Western Massachusetts militia in 1775?
Well, it really comes down to who the message is actually for. Latin was the language of elite aristocratic heraldry. It's the language of empires, royal decrees.
Right.
But the ideological ground in Massachusetts is shifting rapidly toward a populist grassroots movement. The messaging needed to reflect that reality.
So it had to be accessible.
Exactly.
Right.
In defense of freedom, in plain English, is a fundamentally democratic statement. It's designed to be instantly readable and resonant for the farmers, the blacksmiths, the local merchants who are actually standing in that muster line.
So they are stripping away the aristocratic veneer.
Yeah.
It's visual rhetoric moving from a top-down mandate to a bottom-up rallying cry.
That's simply said.
And that localized, steadier approach is reflected right in the canvas itself, too, because the artistic choices in the Reconstruction abandon the aggressive Bedford crimson entirely.
Right.
Instead, we're looking at this deep, rich, colonial blue silk field.
And that choice of blue is heavily grounded in the regional data.
Is it really?
Oh, yeah. The research indicates that colonial blue silk aligns seamlessly with documented militia colors from Essex and Middlesex counties.
Oh, wow, okay.
So in this specific Massachusetts context, blue wasn't just an aesthetic preference, it carried distinct psychological weight. It was favored specifically for its long-standing association with loyalty and vigilance.
I mean, it changes the entire temperature of the flag.
It does.
Like crimson broadcasts blood in open warfare, whereas this deep colonial blue feels like a night watch.
Yes.
It feels inherently defensive. And the way the central arm is rendered in this reconstruction plays directly into that mood, too.
Yeah, because the arm emerging from the clouds isn't this brilliant, flashy silver like on the Bedford flag.
Right. It's painted in cooler steel blue tones that just sort of harmonize with the background.
Right. The arm is clad in segmented plate armor, and the hand, which is protected by a dark gauntlet, holds a raised silver broadsword with a gold hilt.
Yeah.
The aesthetic cohesion is striking, but the symbolism is what really anchors the piece.
But wait, I have to push back on the symbolism a bit here.
Okay, go for it.
We are talking about a militia in 1775.
Right.
These men are carrying muskets, they're wearing tricorn hats and regular civilian clothes.
Mostly, yeah.
So why would they paint a medieval steel blue armored arm holding a broadsword on their flag?
It seems out of place.
Right. It feels archaic, like something pulled from Arthurian legend rather than the era of gunpowder.
Well, what's fascinating here is that 18th century visual literacy just worked differently than ours.
That's so.
They weren't painting a literal representation of their tactical gear, They were utilizing a long-established allegorical vocabulary.
Ah, okay.
So the armor signifies divine strength and timeless endurance. But the broadsword itself, in the context of the emerging American Revolution, takes on a very specific Enlightenment philosophy.
Oh, so it's not a weapon of conquest. It's a philosophical tool.
Precisely. It represents the concept of virtuous defense.
Virtuous defense.
Yeah. The sword is raised and ready, but it is not actively striking. It's a martial posture, but fundamentally a protective one.
Oh, wow. And that aligns flawlessly with the English motto, in defense of freedom.
Exactly. The imagery and the text are working together to say, we are not drawing this sword to expand our territory or subjugate our neighbors.
Right.
We are drawing it solely to protect our inherent rights.
That makes the center of the flag this grand, cohesive Enlightenment statement.
It really does.
But if the center is handling the high-minded philosophy of virtuous defense, the four corners of this reconstruction are doing something entirely different.
Oh, yeah. They're much more localized.
Right. The image provides four distinct emblems,
Right.
one in each corner of the blue field. And I look at these, and I immediately see the 18th century equivalent of visual bumper stickers.
Visual bumper stickers. I love that. Or like hashtags.
Yeah, exactly. Hashtags.
Yeah.
In a pre-digital, highly volatile political landscape, you needed a way to instantly broadcast friend or foe.
Right, because you have militias marching across the countryside. Yeah.
Seeing these specific symbols snapping in the wind from, say, 300 yards away, it told you exactly who you were dealing with before a single shot was ever fired.
Right. So let's break down how this visual shorthand functioned, starting with the more established symbols. In the top left corner, there is a simple five-pointed gold star.
The gold star in this context is a well-documented emblem of celestial guidance.
Okay.
It communicates a theological worldview. It's basically a public declaration that their local cause is aligned with providence and guided by a higher divine power.
And then anchoring the top right corner is a green pine tree with a brown trunk.
Right, the pine tree. That is the ultimate expression of New England rootedness.
Yeah, it's iconic.
It really is. It was a ubiquitous regional symbol that went far beyond just representing the local timber economy.
Right.
It symbolized the specific, stubborn independence of the New England landscape and the people who lived there.
Okay, so the top half of the flag establishes divine right and deep regional roots.
But the bottom half of the flag introduces elements that feel decidedly more radical.
They absolutely do.
In the bottom left, we have a brown pole topped with a bright red cap, a Liberty pole and cap.
And the Liberty pole and cap is where the flag moves from regional pride to overt radical defiance.
Really?
Oh, yeah. This symbol traces its lineage all the way back to the Phrygian cap of ancient Rome.
Oh, wow. The cap's given to freed slaves.
Exactly. It was traditionally given to emancipated slaves, and by the 1770s, it had been resurrected as the premier symbol of anti-imperial resistance.
Right.
Erecting a physical liberty pole in your town square was a massive, highly visible middle finger to British authority.
So putting it on your militia color is basically a declaration of absolute political defiance.
It's the mechanism of revolution painted right onto silk.
Which leads us to the final emblem in the bottom right corner, and this is the one that really caught my eye.
I think I know which one you mean.
It's a shield. The top section is blue with 3 white stars, and the bottom section features red and white vertical stripes.
Yeah.
I have to admit, when I first saw the image in the research, it felt like an anachronism.
It really does at first glance.
Right. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because isn't a shield with stars and stripes a bit premature for a local militia in 1775?
Yeah, considering formal independence and the creation of a national flag are still in the future.
Exactly. It feels like they're jumping the gun.
It's a very natural reaction to view it as out of place, knowing the timeline of the Declaration of Independence, but the research provides crucial context here.
Okay, what's the context?
the visual building blocks that would eventually codify into the official United States flag, the stars, the stripes, the specific combination of red, white, and blue, they didn't just materialize out of thin air in 1777.
Right.
They were already germinating in the colonial consciousness for years prior.
Oh, I see. So we shouldn't view this shield as them predicting the American flag.
No.
We should view it as evidence that the American flag was eventually constructed out of the exact visual rhetoric that was already popular in places like Chesterfield.
That is the essential takeaway, yeah. This shield represents a nascent national identity.
Wow.
It is a plausible, historically grounded symbol that synthesizes how these colonists were beginning to view themselves.
It's like they're caught between two worlds.
Exactly. They are simultaneously declaring their hyper-local identity with the pine tree and exploring a new, unified identity with the stars and stripes. The flag captures a people in the very midst of ideological transition.
To fully grasp the impact of that transition, though, I think we need to step back from the allegories and discuss the physical, material reality of the flag this reconstruction represents.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's easy to analyze this as a flat image on a PDF document, but this was designed to be a tangible, physical object carried into the chaotic environment of a drill field or a literal battle.
And the physical specifications detailed in the research really anchor this intellectual exercise in reality.
Yeah.
We're looking at a color that measures approximately 50 by 60 inches.
That is a massive footprint. We are talking about nearly 4 feet by 5 feet of silk.
It had to be massive. The primary function of a company color is to serve as a visual rallying point amidst the smoke, the noise, the sheer confusion of an 18th century battlefield.
Right. If you can't see it through the black powder smoke, it's useless.
Exactly. And the proportions utilized in this reconstruction perfectly match the dimensions of known infantry colors from the 1770s.
The document also notes that the edges are framed with an elaborate gold fringe.
Right. And the fringe serves a dual purpose.
Oh.
Yeah, practically it prevents the silk edges from fraying in the wind. But more importantly, standard military convention dictated that gold fringe denoted honor and distinction.
So it's not just decorative.
No, it signaled to everyone looking at it that this wasn't merely a functional marker. It was the symbolic, sacred heart of the community's defense.
And the hardware supporting it is equally substantial. The silk is mounted to a thick, dark hardwood staff, and the top is capped with this striking gilt spearhead finial. The research highlights that surviving finials from this era were typically brass or gilt wood, shaped as spearheads or acorns, which adds another layer of martial readiness to the physical object.
Yeah, it's a serious piece of equipment.
But the most interesting material aspect to me is the medium itself.
The paint.
Yes. The document stresses that this reconstruction relies on visible brushwork on costly silk. It is a painted flag, not an embroidered one.
And the choice between paint and embroidery tells a fascinating story about the economic realities of a colonial militia.
How so?
Well, professional embroidery was the standard for Royal European armies.
Right.
It was an incredibly labor-intensive art form that required specialized artisans and a massive budget. A local militia company in western Massachusetts simply did not have the funding or the access to commission-complex, double-sided silk embroidery.
But they still wanted the visual impact that silk provides.
Exactly. Silk was expensive, but it was the non-negotiable standard for formal colors because of how it interacts with light and pigment.
Right.
So communities would pool their resources to acquire the raw silk, and then they'd rely on local artisans, sign painters, carriage decorators, or just talented community members to paint the heraldry directly onto the fabric.
So it's like getting the local guy who paints the pub signs to do your military banner.
Pretty much.
Yeah, brilliant workaround. They managed to achieve these deep, resonant blues and brilliant golds, creating a stunning visual impact on the field, but they do it using the practical skills available within their own zip code.
It perfectly encapsulates the tension of the era, doesn't it?
It really does.
They're striving for the high aesthetic standards of an established military, but they're executing it with the scrappy, practical reality of a grassroots rebellion.
Yeah, the resulting composition balances classical symmetry with radical allegory. It's a highly sophisticated piece of visual communication achieved on a provincial budget.
Which brings us back to the giant, flashing neon caveat that hangs over this entire analysis.
Ah, yes, we have to bring this up.
The research document is incredibly transparent about this, and we definitely need to reiterate it for our listeners.
Right, the disclaimer on provenance and plausibility is the bedrock of this entire exercise.
Exactly.
Because all of the specific details we have unpacked today, The deep colonial blue, the armored arm holding the broadsword of virtuous defense, the liberty cap, the painted silk. These are all inferred from analogous examples and period conventions.
There is zero direct evidence.
Right. The Chesterfield Militia Company may never have possessed a formal color. And if they did, its true appearance is entirely lost to history.